Hello and welcome to my presentation on polio. Poliomyelitis, or polio, is an acute infectious disease caused by an enterovirus that lives and replicates exclusively in the alimentary canal of infected humans. The disease spreads via contact with the stool of an infected person, often through contaminated drinking water, and less commonly through oral or nasal secretions. Most infections involve asymptomatic viral replication, although about a quarter of infected persons develop nonspecific clinical symptoms such as headache, fever, and sore throat. The disease can spread to the spinal cord and brain, causing stiffness in the neck and limbs and potentially destruction of motor neurons, resulting in varying degrees of paralysis. Polio mainly affects children under 5 years of age, although there have been cases reported in children as old as 10. The existence of polio in developed countries such as the United States can be described in 3 phases. An endemic phase, prior to the 20th century, where poliovirus typically produced minimal symptoms in affected individuals, likely due to naturally acquired immunity through early exposure and protection by maternal antibodies. An epidemic phase, during which we begin to see localized outbreaks of severe poliomyelitis across the United States and Europe, occurring primarily during humid summer months. And third, the vaccine phase, following the administration of an early polio vaccine throughout the entirety of the United States in 1955. The symptoms of polio have been described by many names throughout history, and record of the disease only exists in fragments. However, the general consensus is that isolated cases of poliomyelitis have occurred for many millennia. Perhaps the earliest evidence of polio can be seen in an Egyptian painting dated between 1580 and 1350 BCE, which depicts an adult with one withered leg and a crutch. The poet Sir Walter Scott described his own experience of fever and subsequent lameness as a child in 1773, which left him with a lifelong limp. In 1789, the English pediatrician Michael Underwood writes of a debility of the lower extremities in his treatise on the diseases of children. In 1840, orthopedist Jacob von Hein published a 78-page monograph recognizing poliomyelitis as a disease entity. From 1887 to 1895, Swedish pediatrician Oscar Medin, building on Hein's work, wrote a comprehensive description of the disease in Stockholm. Henceforth, polio was commonly referred to by the eponym Hein-Medin disease in Germany and Scandinavia. It is thought that the conspicuous presentation of symptoms of paralytic poliomyelitis would have made any previous epidemic occurrence apparent in historical contexts. Because few case reports have been found prior to the late 19th century, it is concluded that the virus was pathologically of little significance until later. Earliest recognized epidemics of polio occurred in Sweden in 1881, England in 1897, and Massachusetts and Vermont in 1894. Appearance of outbreaks in European countries and in the United States were remarkably synonymous. Annual epidemics occurred with regularity over the next 50 to 60 years. In 1916, poliovirus infected more than 27,000 Americans and killed more than 7,000. 1949 and 1952 marked 2 more peak years for polio in the United States, with confirmed cases reaching over 42,000 and 57,000 respectively. Here you can see those figures drawn out in this chart from Our World in Data. The spread of polio, like most viral diseases in modern climates, occurred seasonally. Disease incidence was most devastating in temperate regions with humid summers. Popular advice during the summers of polio included keeping children well bathed, well fed, away from public pools, drinking fountains, movie theaters, open drains, and unscreened windows. Cats, mosquitoes, and common houseflies were commonly implicated in popular explanations for outbreaks. Virology was not well understood when polio wreaked havoc on average American families. Disease had primarily been attributed to poor hygiene and unsanitary living conditions, an idea that was reinforced by declining bacterial illnesses such as diphtheria and typhoid. The modern hypothesis for the sudden rise in paralytic polio cases is that outbreaks were associated with a delay in exposure to enteric pathogens. In the endemic period prior to the 20th century, enteric infections were so pervasive that most infants had encountered them with minimal symptoms and developed active immunity within the first year of life. Presence of circulating maternal antibodies reduced the virulence of the disease. Advancements in hygiene and sanitation reduced chances of exposure to the virus during infancy and therefore increased the susceptibility of young children no longer protected by passive antibodies. In 1905, Ivar Wickman, a Swedish physician, suggested that polio was a contagious disease that could be transmitted from person to person. The etiologic agent of polio, Enterovirus C, or poliovirus, was discovered in Vienna by Karl Landsteiner and Erwin Popper. They injected monkeys with a filtered preparation of spinal fluid from a person who had died of polio. When the monkeys fell ill with polio, they concluded that the infectious agent was a particle smaller than bacteria. A more severe bulbar type of paralysis occurred when poliovirus infected motor cells in the cervical spine and brainstem. This could produce paralysis of the muscles involved in swallowing and breathing. Designed in 1928, the iron lung, a full body-size iron chamber, assisted patients with breathing by mechanically lowering and raising the air pressure within the chamber. Often, due to the intensive care required by persons using the iron lung, several dozen patients would be housed in a central location. This concept evolved into the modern intensive care unit. Perhaps the most significant victim of polio was the 39-year-old former New York State Senator and future U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He fell ill with the disease in 1921 and it left both of his legs paralyzed for life. Through his personal experience, he was inspired to help pioneer medical initiatives such as the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, later known as the March of Dimes campaign. The fundraising of the NFIP helped lead to research and the eventual discovery of a vaccine. Roosevelt also purchased a spa in Warm Springs, Georgia, to be used as a rehabilitative facility. This facility served as a model for restorative medicine prior to widespread adoption of physical therapy. The first attempts to introduce polio vaccines to the public proved to be disastrous. Two separate teams tested their developments on thousands of subjects in 1935. Neither were successful, but several subjects died, some were paralyzed, and many suffered illness or allergic reaction. Multiple successes in vaccination development for diseases such as influenza and smallpox had been accomplished by the time polio cases surged again in 1952. Jonas Salk, credited with developing the first polio vaccine, approved for widespread use, had begun the first stages of testing his vaccine at this time. In 1955, Salk's inactivated polio vaccine was declared both safe and effective. In 1961, Dr. Albert Sabin developed a live oral vaccine against polio. The Sabine oral polio vaccine was rapidly announced and widely adopted soon after. Efforts of health officials paired with the ease of administration of the oral polio vaccine halted the transmission of wild-type poliovirus in the United States by 1979. In 1988, following the global eradication of smallpox, the World Health Organization envisioned the global eradication of wild-type poliovirus as their next task. Although poliovirus has yet to be entirely eradicated, global incidence of polio cases has decreased by 99% since the WHO announced their goal.